Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. Vegetation meets the bloodthirsty as we return to work on our Plants vs. Zombies Cross Vampire Survivors mashup, which last episode was pretty productive. We added a bunch more unique plants, including the likes of the cattail. We also added the first of the upgrade plants for the pea shooter and sunflower. These additions forced some major changes to the way that placing plants worked, which I hoped to have to never fiddle with again. Well, spoilers, will be fiddling with it again. But first, if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing so you never miss a new episode. Now with that said, let's start with the changes to the placement code. So in order to make this process as simple as possible, checks have been broken down into separate functions. So during the plant placement event, we now check for both evolution and tile-specific plants individually, and based on the results from those checks, determines the next set of checks to finally place a plant. This hopefully means that by separating placement types instead of lumping them all into the same check, should prevent potential issues down the line. That's the hope, at least. So with that said, let's move on to the new additions. The first is arguably the largest change, and that's the addition of tile interactivity. The player can no longer pass through water and grave tiles. As for the enemy, different variants now have their speed modified based on the tile that they're currently walking over. And yes, I said variant as there are now 3 different variations of enemy: air, ground, and water. For ground units, they're slowed while on grave tiles, and even slower in water. Water units are slower on regular ground and grave tiles, but faster in the water. And air units are not affected by any tiles. Air units are also the only affected by a couple of plants, one of them being the cattail. When struck by a cattail's projectile, the air unit becomes a ground unit. Now, PvZ veterans may notice that this is quite the change from the original, and the truth is the original concept wasn't going to work in this environment. Not to mention that the collision checks for tiles and their navigation around said tiles would become very taxing with enough units on screen. And believe me, I spent a ton of time trying to make it work. So it was decided that we would embrace a more free-form approach and have the environment decide the behaviors. It needs a bit of work, but I think that it's a fair compromise from both a gameplay and general performance standpoint. And so while on the subject of variants, let's talk about a new plant addition, the Blover. In our version, the Blover is a one-time use plant that, while active, will push away any units within proximity to its position. It will also turn any nearby air units into ground units, after which it then destroys itself. And fun fact, the original plan was to use collision circles, but overlapping circles would cause other Blovers to literally stop functioning. Not sure the cause of the issue, but hopefully the alternative won't be too taxing down the line. Now again, this was a pretty notable change from the original PvZ unit, and the reasoning is similar to the enemy changes. The original just wouldn't have worked well in our mashup environment. And concentrating on a singular column or row in a world where plants can be chewed on from any direction means that updating certain behaviors like the Blover are kinda necessary. And to help further explain what I mean, let's move on to our next addition, the Chomper. The good old Chomper works just like it does in Plants vs. Zombies. It'll check for an enemy in front of it, and once it's within eating distance, will destroy said enemy, sending the Chomper into its secondary state to cool down to repeat the process. Now, unlike the Blover, the Chomper only checks directly in front of it using a collision line. It's not proximity based, and as a result, any enemy slightly out of range of that line check turns the Chomper into a free meal. As personally, I feel like a lot of these plants would be devalued without any changes, which is exactly why there's been a larger emphasis on updating plants to be proximity based instead of simply directional based. But you know what isn't directional based? Our next plant, the Tango Kelp. It works just like the PvZ version, which code-wise makes it a hybrid of the spikeweed and chomper. When an enemy touches the Tango Kelp, it is removed along with the kelp plant itself. Thankfully, this one didn't require anything too extra and further helped test the updated placement code. And so finally, let's talk one last change, and that's to the Doom Shroom. As mentioned previously, I think it should be a bit more devastating. So now there's a slight chance that the Doom Shroom will also destroy nearby sun pickups on detonation, which again is quite similar to the pentagram from Vampire Survivors. Generally speaking, this session has begun that exact challenge that I've been expecting and dreading since the start. as it's hopefully been clear from all the changes and additions this session, the mashup aspect of this mashup project is really going to require some creative problem solving. We could simply transplant everything one to one, but that'd be too simple. It also wouldn't really work very well, actually like at all probably. Now we've thankfully made it to a point where majority if not all of the unique plant behaviors have been implemented, which means that we can now focus on the actual gameplay loop. And I think that once we figure that out, we'll be able to, build everything around it with much greater ease. Which now begs the question, what is that loop? At the time I'm recording this, I don't really know, but hopefully we'll know by next episode. But no matter how long it takes, we'll hopefully get there. And even if we ultimately end up failing to mash up Plants vs. Zombies with Vampire Survivors, man, we've come quite a way in at least trying. Which is all we can really ask for, right? Gotta remain positive, folks. But as always, I would love to know what you think of these additions and changes. So let me know how you feel about the current trajectory. Also, I'm now on Patreon if you would like to support the channel beyond just watching these videos. But regardless, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.